I'm going in the wrong direction, aren't I? We're going back into Daniel, and we start, I think we have the last several weeks about the things that Daniel prophesied about 600 years before Jesus was born. First thing was he prophesied the rebuilding of Jerusalem. Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian Empire, when they went into Judah, that's where Jerusalem was, they took all the Hebrews out, took them into slavery, into Babylon, and they literally leveled the city, destroyed everything. Right now, we know Daniel said, well, the remnant, there's going to be a day when they go back and restore the temple and the city. That came to pass. He also talked about the rise and fall of the Gentile nations, and this is associated with the dream of the statue, which we'll look at during the message today. But Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome all came and went, just like Daniel said they would. Prophecy fulfilled. Then he talked about the coming and the death of the Messiah. He prophesied about the birth and death of Jesus. Prophecy fulfilled. So those things have been done. And then he prophesied two other main things. The time of troubles, which we call the tribulation, 7-year period, 7 years after the rapture and before the 1,000-year reign, which is the time of righteousness. So we have those to be fulfilled. Now, we don't know when the rapture is going to occur. It'd be neat if it happened like now. And what would be neat about that is there'd be a lot of churches that are still full of people, sadly. Yeah, you get the joke, right? Yeah. So Daniel did all this stuff 600 years before Christ is when he basically was kidnapped and next many weeks. He was a big deal in the city of Babylon well into his 80s. So he started as a 15, 16-year-old boy, prophesying this stuff when he was 18 or 19, and then life goes on. So we're going to recognize a lot of this as we go into our message today. I did want to start with a couple texts. This is from Micah, and you heard some of this today by Joanne. He has told you, mortal one, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice. So he's talking to people. This is, the prophet Micah is talking to the nation of Israel, all the Hebrews. He's prophesying, and he says, this is what the Lord wants you to do. Pay attention, you guys. He says, do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with your God. That's pretty good instruction. Matthew, in the 7th chapter, this is towards the end of the Beatitudes. He said in verse 24, chapter 7, therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them, may he be compared to a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and slammed against that house, and yet it did not fall, for it had been founded on the rock. Jesus used a lot of parables in his teachings, and he also used what we call types, T-Y-P-E-S, types, which is an inference about this means that. It's a kind of a translation thing that Jesus would say, this is an example of what this would be. And when he's talking about in Matthew, when he said where it had been founded on the rock, he was the rock, Jesus. And now all of a sudden, history and life has changed forever. And when we get into Daniel's 6th chapter, we start to find ourselves getting close to familiarity. Because the 6th chapter is where we find Daniel making friends with some lions. You might have heard that story. Well, we're going to get there over the next 2 weeks. And the reality for that message has to do with how we react to God in life, how we rely on Him, how we communicate with Him. And because of the stability of Daniel's life from birth until death, Daniel never wavered. And we'll see a lot of that today. He was arrow straight with his faith in Yahweh, Jehovah, the Lord of the Hebrews. He was always spot on. And when Jesus talked about the integrity of our faith and the character that will keep us from falling out of grace, that's where we see everything start to change. So when we get into this chapter, now we see some things that have started to really unfold before us, because we have a new king. We have a new king. Last week we met him. We met Belshazzar. And what makes this significant in the prophecies? Remember the dream, Nebuchadnezzar's dream, okay? This is the big statue. And it started off with Babylon, the head of gold. And Nebuchadnezzar was the most powerful man in the world, and he was the wealthiest and the most respected and the most feared. And he was the best that ever was and had been up until that time. Well, then, things change. Belshazzar becomes the king eventually. And then out to the east there's this group of folks called the Medes and the Persians, which they had a king named Cyrus. It was actually two different geographical regions. There was the Media, then there was Persia, and they merged together and formed a really, really formidable force. And so they came on the scene here, and they were going to confront Babylon kingdom. So, the Babylonian army goes out to face them, and they get destroyed. And Cyrus's army keeps it coming. And at the end of the day, we know what happened. If you were here last week, you knew what happened. And that is that Belshazzar had a big feast and a party, and he drank a lot of Boone's Farm. And he was like really wiped out, and he says, nobody can hurt me. I'm in this big fortified city. And Cyrus's general figured out how to do this. He stopped up the river Euphrates that had flowed into the center of Babylon. It dropped down to where there was no water. That meant the gates that protected the city and the river were now exposed. And Cyrus says, okay, go ahead and take over the city. So at like 1 o'clock in the morning, all the drunk people were sleeping, and the Babylonian army marches in underneath those gates because they're now exposed. And they just walk right in and kind of say hi to everybody, and they go over to Belshazzar and say, hey, what's up, king? Off with your head. That's that. So then we have a new player in town, and that is Persia, the Medes and Persians, and they now take over this, and that's where we find ourselves starting today in the 6th chapter. It's a new beginning for this ancient civilization. Babylon had been around for like 1,000 years. They had never been defeated in anything. Now all of a sudden they have a new boss, and that brings us to what we're going to be talking about this morning. And it leads us to understand a couple things that are going to be changing, and that is, in the Persian Empire, they have a different set of rules and regulations for governance than in the Babylonian Empire. It was real easy in Babylon. I mean, you had the king and everybody else. That's it. Now, you did have Daniel as a power player until Nebuchadnezzar passed. Then he became kind of like off to the side. Well, then Belshazzar comes along, and he finally gets him to interpret a dream, and he becomes the second or third guy again. Well, now here we have something different going on. Now, in your texts, and what we're going to be reading here, talks about Darius, King Darius. Darius could be another name for Cyrus. Cyrus is a Hebrew name that means God's chosen and Darius is a Persian name. So theologians and historians are conflicted about the reality of either Darius was the leader of the Mede side of the conquest, and Cyrus was the leader of the Persian side. But it's possible that they could be one and the same. We just don't know for sure. But this is where we find ourselves going into this political situation. This political situation. Verse number 1, chapter 6. It seemed good to Darius to appoint 120 satraps over the kingdom, that they should be in charge of the whole kingdom. Satraps. A satrap is a word that basically means provincial governor. It's a position of authority, and when you think now about the size of this empire, remember this is like from Greece all the way over to what was then China and India. This is a big deal. The Babylonian Empire was huge. Now you add into that Media and Persia, it gets bigger yet. And their form of government says, well, we're going to have 120 guys that are going to be provincial governors. So they divided up the whole empire into 120 different sections. But that's not all. They didn't just do that. Over them, 3 commissioners. These would be like vice presidents. 3 commissioners were put in charge over them, that the satraps might be accountable. And Daniel's one of the 3. So that makes him one of the 4 strongest guys in the kingdom now. The king plus the other 3 commissioners. They're the big shots. That these satraps might be accountable to them, and that the king might not suffer loss. In other words, these were the people that were going to protect the empire so that King Darius / Cyrus would not have to worry about anything. Life will be good. I don't know if you like Boone's Farm or not, but he could probably party too. So this gets us to the area where we think that this ruler now, who is a different sort of guy, make things more personal. He's this individual who has recognized the fact that there are ways to utilize other people in significant ways that could probably help him. And he knows that Daniel, this special prophet, remember where Daniel? Here's Daniel. He was brought in as this teenager. He was the king's favorite for 50, 60 years, regardless who the king was. And now, he's just one of those guys that are there in the section for former slaves who came from Judah. And the reality for all of that is when this king, who is a personal type fellow, also recognizes the personal aspects of the life of Daniel, then everything starts to change. It's an acknowledgement about the spirit that Daniel has. He is somebody that impresses people in a different way. And we know that all of this is come about because Daniel relies on the sovereign direction of God. Everything is at his whim and mercy. And all of a sudden we see all of these things start to happen with Daniel as a commissioner, and he starts to have an impact. Then Daniel began, verse 3, distinguishing himself. Now, can you imagine that? There's 3 commissioners, 120 satraps, and all of a sudden Daniel stands out. Coincidence, right? Yeah. Here's Daniel. All of a sudden he's become special, distinguishing himself among the commissioners and satraps because he possessed this extraordinary spirit. And you might say, man, that's really great. And it is. It talks about the different attributes that people have that can carry themselves in a special way. We would call that today integrity, People that have integrity stand out in the crowd. Here we see Daniel's first mark of integrity, which is that he has an excellent attitude. He's never down. He's always positive. He's like, yeah, okay, king, here I am. What do you want me to do? And it's good. He is secure in his God, and he is secure in himself. No lack of confidence here. And because of this attitude that he possesses, he catches the king's eye. That's that personal aspect about Darius that he notices. Daniel is different. And he's contemplating with some of his friends about making Daniel and be in charge of the whole deal. He can kick back and let Daniel run the whole show. I mean, he did it for Nebuchadnezzar. Why can't he do it for me? Well, that didn't sit too well with some of the other folks. But why do we think this is how it was going to unfold? Well, Psalm 75 and verse 7, the psalmist said, God is the judge. God's the judge, ultimately, not King Darius. He puts down one and exalts another. And in Daniel 3, the last part of it says, and the king planned to appoint him over the entire kingdom. Now, that sounds really great, except he was one. There were 2 other commissioners, and there were 120 satraps. How's this going to play out? Well, these guys, the other guys, were all pretty much terrified that this exile from Judah was going to be their boss. You ever wonder what kind of boss you're going to have? I mean, Holly, he wouldn't have been the guy that said, hey, have you heard of the Petersons? He's the guy that would say, you're in trouble, Buster, and you just lost your job. Matter of fact, I'm going to take away your 401k. No good. And these guys, all of a sudden, put together a plan. They have decided that they're going to have these accusations that they attempt at. So they have a plot, and they've got attempted accusations that they think will make a big difference in how all of this unfolds in their lives. We go to verse 4. Then the commissioners and satraps began trying to find a ground of accusation against Daniel in regard to government affairs. Notice it's in regard to government, not anything personal. They're not trying to pick a fight here. They're just trying to figure out a way that they can get rid of him. They could find no grounds of accusation or evidence of corruption. Wow. Inasmuch as he was faithful. So, what do? His enemies were basically shadowing him. They had spies everywhere, watching everything he did, trying to find a weakness in his humanity, something that they could use against him. Maybe they would be able to get this one thing and show it to the king, and that would be the end of Daniel. Then they could go on with their whatever they were going to do, their strategy to take over the kingdom themselves, probably. And the reality was Daniel was faithful in all of his work. He was faithful in all of his work. Never wavered, never fell away from that. And second part of this goes to tell us that in Proverbs, when you think about wisdom and character, Solomon kind of like is the expert resource. Proverbs 20:6. Many a man proclaims his own loyalty, but who can find a trustworthy man? A righteous man who walks in his integrity, how blessed are his sons after him. Well, then in Daniel, the 4th verse, the second part says, there is no negligence or corruption found in him. In other words, Daniel was like perfect. They couldn't find anything to say, hey, Daniel's really rotten at this, he's bad at this, he's no good at this. No. His honesty and his integrity was never corrupted. So basically what that meant was his personal purity was always evident. His personal purity was He tolerated no hypocrisy. He was wide open in his life. He had nothing to hide. He always knew God was there, and he had to be accountable. I mean, it's like we do when we know company's coming, and we get out the good china and the good silverware and all that stuff. And you say, well, what would you do if Jesus was coming? And say, well, we'd really find a place. And you say, well, guess what? He's been here all along. He saw you put that dirty plate down in front of your cousin. Shame on you. So here's this guy. He's made his life centered around his godliness and how he reacts in the civil marketplace. These persecutors of his, though, they're not impressed. Matter of fact, they're downright disgusted. He is like too good. I mean, you know people like that? They're just so good that, can't you do something wrong? And they remained undeterred in this scheme of theirs to try and come up with a way to get him. So we jump to verse number 5. Then these men said, these are the satraps and the other commissioners, we will not find any ground of accusation against this Daniel unless we find it against him with regard to the law of his own God. With the law of his God. So their whole premise now is to do something that would be worshiping his God instead of paying attention to his duties with the king. And this is where they start to put together this whole scheme. And it starts with this, what we would call an injunction. Verse 6 ends, King Darius, live forever. Yep, that's the proper way you address a king in the day. Live forever. All the commissioners of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the high officials and the satraps, the high officials and the governors have consulted together that the king should establish a statute. That would be a law, an injunction. And enforce this injunction that anyone who makes a petition to any god, small g, meaning all of the hundreds of gods that the Medes and Persians had, any god or man besides you, O king, for 30 days shall be cast into the lion's den. Yeah, 30 days. And I don't know why they picked 30 days. I mean, typically you would think 30 minutes, you know? I mean, what's with 30 days? I mean, breakfast, lunch, and dinner with dessert, right? Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it may not be changed according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which may not be revoked. Therefore, King Darius signed the document. Whoa, that is the injunction. Now, did you notice something right away here? It says, all the commissioners of the kingdom, except one. Remember, there's 3 of them. All 2 of them were in this meeting, and Daniel was missing. That's convenient, isn't it? They start this whole premise with a lie. Yeah, all of us agree. Now, can you see Daniel sitting in on a conference saying, let's make up this law so the lions eat me? Where did that come from? You know? So we know that verse 10 tells us, now then, when Daniel knew that the document was signed, now he wasn't present, but he's aware. He knows what's going on. He entered his house. Now in his roof chamber, he had windows open towards Jerusalem. Okay, now he was a higher up guy, so he had a penthouse level apartment. And, their relaxation place was always the roof, because in the evening the cool air would blow over the roof and it would be comfortable. And in the daytime you could, get a tan. But here he is, he's looking out the window towards Jerusalem, praying to God. And this tells us nothing would ever take away from his devotion to Yahweh. It didn't matter what, he would always be in a position to where he would be lifting up his praise and his prayers to the Lord. And he continues on here, and he continued kneeling on his knees 3 times a day, praying and giving thanks before his God, capital G, Yahweh, as he had been doing previously. In other words, from the moment he was brought into Babylon as a teenager until this very moment, every day, 3 times a day, he would pray towards Jerusalem to keep his life in tune with what God would have him to do. And the reality for this means he had this very, very consistent walk with God. He had this consistent walk with God. It's something all of us strive to do. You know, we like to live each day like we're living for the Lord. And if we accomplish that by the time we hit the bed at night, it's been a really good day. Amen? So that's our goal. That was his goal as well. Verse 11, then these men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and supplication before his God. So they kind of like were sneaking around his apartment, penthouse, and they see him there over by the window. They probably just pulled back the curtain. You know, they didn't have really good doors. Look at, he's praying. I saw him do that at lunch too. Okay, let's tell the king. Okay. Then they approached and spoke before the king about the king's injunction. Did you not sign an injunction? Like they're asking the king this. We just did it yesterday, buddy. Yeah, of course I remember. Did you not sign an injunction that any man who makes a petition to any god, small g, or man besides you, O king, for 30 days is to be cast into the lion's den? And the king replied, the statement is true according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which may not be revoked. Let me stop there. They had within the archives, and this has been clarified historically and archaeologically, that they had, one of their laws was when a king made an edict, it would never, ever, ever be erased. Could you imagine our country if it was run that way? Oh my goodness. Nobody would be allowed to have a musket. Oh, no. Then they answered and spoke before the king. Oh, look at this. Daniel, who is one of the exiles, emphasized, Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or to the injunction which you signed. But he keeps making his petition 3 times a day. And as soon as the king heard this statement, he was deeply distressed and set his mind on delivering Daniel. And even until sunset, he kept exerting himself to rescue him. Imagine that. He knows the significance of Daniel in the life of his kingdom, Persia. He understands that he's like the linchpin. He's what is going to hold it together, both politically and socially, and keeping everything calm and within the confines of civility with all of the different people that have become a part of Babylon. I mean, they just didn't bring all the people from Jerusalem. They brought people from Damascus, they brought people from Turkey, they brought people from all over. So you have this massive humanity that makes up the citizenry of Babylon, and Daniel could keep them all in order. He was like, you know, the ringmaster with the lions going around, you know, hey, everybody's good, no problem. But he's trying to rescue him. Then these men came by agreement to the king and said to the king, recognize, O king, that it is the law of the Medes and Persians that no injunction or statute which the king establishes may be changed. Like he didn't know that already. And the things that would occur over the next many days are very significant. Verse 16, then the king gave orders, and Daniel was brought in, and he was cast into the lion's den. And you would probably think that's the end of the story. Not. It's what we find is the way that we understand God's plan to unfold prophetically. And that's the whole purpose of all this Daniel stuff. We're trying to establish the truth about what biblical prophecy is and how it's going to affect each and every one of us at a point in time. And as we get further into Daniel and then get into Thessalonians and Revelation, we'll really have a deep understanding about what all this entails. And all this talk I have about the rapture and the tribulation and the millennial reign and all that, everything falls into place. And what I will tell you now is that you should be the most happy people on the planet when you understand all these truths, because we got nothing to fear. I mean, we're going to be the happy people. The sad people are going to be all those ones that are stuck in a church when we're gone, because that's what the rapture is. It's the taking up of the believers, dead and alive, and the ones that aren't believers are going to be left behind, and they're going to have to deal with the Antichrist, who we're going to talk about in a couple of weeks. It's a really difficult thing. So what we strive to understand when we're going through all this, as we start to wrap up for today, you seldom get what you deserve from people. You ever think about that? You seldom get what you deserve from people. When we genuinely deserve, say, honor, or we have something of value that needs to be noticed, oftentimes we get criticism about some other thing, not the positive thing. It's some of the things that happened in life where we have confrontations that are based on something that has nothing to do with what's going on at the moment. It's kind of like, women have this marvelous memory. You ever think about that? It's like, I was married 54 years, and we dated for 3 before that. So that's a 57-year relationship. And I guarantee you, she could remember stuff I did in high school. It's like, well, I remember when you looked at so-and-so. Well, I was a dumb kid. What was I supposed to do, Or after you've been married for a long time and you have kids that are growing up and you say, what do you mean you wish we'd have had boys? I remember you said that back in 1973. I love my wife, I never said stuff like that. Just kidding. But, we run into these situations where things come up and we think, boy, I really did something good. And somebody brings up something that's negative, and it's like, well, wait, that has nothing to do with what I did good, Now, let me stop here and give you an advertisement. The Schumacher family is down at the river today. And Katie Schumacher is who does our IT stuff. She does all of our stuff on the internet and the website and the address book and all that stuff. She has all of our stuff now set up, and it's really great. I gave her new pictures of the church and everything, and she changed everything. If you have Facebook, search Facebook, St. James Church at Crossroads, and you'll see a picture of our church with the red roof, and then you go to that and you can see my sermons. We also have a YouTube channel now. So if you go to YouTube and type in St. James Church at Crossroads, there's a bunch of them. But when you click go, the church with the red roof shows up, and you click on it, and she has very nicely organized my sermons for the last 4 or 5 weeks. And so every week, that's why we video them. She puts them on now YouTube. So that's my commercial, and it's free. But that's something I would praise Katie about, because she has done this marvelous job and she's really good at it. That's what she does in her day job. She's an IT person, and was doing something bad in church back when she was 7. I remember that, Katie. Yeah, I know your dad had to take you outside. I remember that, yeah. But I don't do that, do I? We don't do that. We just praise him. So, secondly, you always get what's best from God. Let's listen to this. Whatever you do, do your work heartily as for the Lord, rather than for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance. It is the Lord Christ whom you serve. In other words, we always give our best. And that's the next outline thing. We give our best to the Lord. And sometimes it's hard, isn't it? Sometimes it's hard, depending upon what the situation is that we're involved in. You know, I can say this because of my friends in the back row, but there are times in our gatherings. Every week we meet on a Monday, a bunch of our alumni, and we all get together, and that's why on the prayer list I have the GHS 66 group, Green High School, class of 1966. Frankly, because a lot of my classmates need prayer. Oh. Sarcastically saying that. But there are some that are in more need than others. So, when we strive to get what's best from God, we have to try and live a way that's the best we can live for God. Amen? And lastly, how you handle different stuff. Let's see what we see here in Matthew. This is a part of the Beatitudes. Or what man is there among you who, when his son asks for a loaf, you give him a stone? Wow. Or if he asks for a fish, he will not give him a snake, will he? If you then, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children. Stop. Evil in the Greek that's used in this translation is a word that it's like for an overbearing parent. Okay, not that you're bad. It's just that you're watching everything your kids do. You're really aware. You're not going to let them get away with anything. You being overbearing parent, know how to give good gifts to your children. How much more will your Father who is in heaven give you what is good to those who ask him? That's the reality of the difference between an eternal God who loves us all the time without reservation, gives us grace and mercy as the greatest gifts ever through forgiveness of sins in Jesus Christ's blood, versus a parent who can at one moment be loving the kid, and then if the kid does something bad, 5 minutes later it's like off to your room or sit in the corner, fold your hands, do this, do that. Bad kid. Well, that's the definition of evil up there for the parenting. God could do the same thing. He could put us in the corner. How'd you like to get that message? All right, Bill, go to the corner. Okay, God. But what all that means is how you handle working with people and how you handle doing what's best for humanity and from God then is determined by your walk. It's determined by your walk. And it's so easy for us to get off track in different times. When we lose our focus, I guess that would be the right way to say it. We're not always concerned or concentrating on a certain aspect of our faith journey. It's like Alice taught me many years ago, you may be the only Bible somebody reads. And by doing that, you are exhibiting the reality of exactly what your walk is in regards to your relationship with the Lord. So, we're going to wrap up with verse number 5. And you'll note in your insert that next week we're going to jump to verse 16b and then go to the 28. It'll be a good study next week because it's what happens after this episode where Daniel is thrown in to the lion's den. What happens next? So let's read this book, chapter, verse. Daniel 6:5. Then these men said, we shall not find any ground of accusation against this Daniel unless we find it against him with regard to the law of his God. And oh, surprise, surprise, they could not find anything about his missing out on what God would want him to do.